Magandang araw po sa inyo. Welcome sa isa na namang episode ng online series ni Inang Pamantasan kung saan ang pagkatuto ay walang hangganan. Ito ang PNU Talks. Ako nga pala si Anne-Marie R. Alcaraz at ako ang inyong Learning from Home buddy sa episode na ito. Ngayong araw ay ating pag-uusapan ang tungkol sa learning resource preparation, considerations, and appropriateness in the development process. Maaaring i-comment ang inyong mga katanungan at mga kuro-kuro tungkol sa ating episode ngayong araw na ito. Huwag kalimutang i-like at i-share ang episode natin. Learning resource preparation, considerations, and appropriateness on the development process. So one of the hardest challenges we are experiencing today as an educator in this time of pandemic is the delivery of teaching and learning opportunities for our students, specifically in the learning resource area. So the sole key we have to reach the children is by the means of the learning resources that we prepare and distribute for their use in the distance learning. To help us with the basic preparations of learning resources, specifically the text-based or print ones, this is the outline of topics that we will be talking about today. So the first one is the preview on the design and development. Next is the considerations in developing learning resources in general aspect, preparations, appropriateness of materials, and format. With the implementation of the rationalization program of the Department of Education, Instructional Materials Council Secretariat or IMCS was renamed into Bureau of Learning Resources, which includes the offices of the IMCS, Philippine Printing House for the Blind, Learning Hubs, or LRNDS, and the Cebu-based National Science Teaching Instrumentation Center. So let us refresh our minds about the learning resources. So what are learning resources? So learning resources are any print, text-based, or non-print, non-text-based materials, devices, tools, and equipments, and other media aligned with the K-12 curriculum used as primary basis or supplements to teaching and learning process. So as mentioned in the PNU Talks last week about LRMDS, there are different resources types. So there is the learner's resource. So when we talk about learning resource, it is designed to be used directly by the students. That is integrated in the teacher-developed lesson plan. So ito yung direktang ginagamit ng mga bata sa kanilang pag-aaral like activity sheets and the like. So ito yung kanilang sinasagutan, binabasa at kanilang nahahawakan para sa kanilang pag-aaral throughout the year. So the next one is the teaching resource. So it is an educational resource, digital or non-digital, that supports teachers in the curriculum development, delivery and pedagogy, or teacher trainers in the delivery of professional development programs such as daily lesson log, daily lesson plan, lesson exemplar, and teacher's guide. So the third one is the professional development material. It is also a digital or non-digital educational training development resource or program designed with a training and development purpose. Such programs may contain or reference to the LRs and TRs. So ang example naman po nito is the workbook, Professional Development Activities for Teachers. So learning resources are also categorized in the following. First one is the text-based. So in the text-based, there are two categories or types, which are the print materials and the non-print materials. So sa print materials, makikita po natin, this is the common learning materials na ginagamit ng ating mga estudyante at kadalasan mas familiar din tayo. Like activity sheets, learner's material, modules, scenes, storybooks, reader, and workbook. So sa non-print materials naman are the educational audios, interactive learning text-based apps, tactile learning resources, at yung ibang dinidevelop na offline interactive lessons ng ating mga co-teachers, as well as pati yung mga video lessons na din. Another category is the non-text-based learning tools and equipment or LTE. So these are the mathematic equipment, science equipment, TLE, TVL equipment, manipulatives, and artifacts. Of course, there are also other learning resources with relevance to the K-12 curriculum which can be classified as one. So ito yung mga learning materials na pwede nating ipa-validate, ipa-evaluate sa ating mga divisions para maging reliable na learning materials na pwedeng gamitin ng mga students at pwedeng i-publish sa ating LRMDS. So here are the structures also of the Learning Resource Team on the DepEd Regional or Division and the Learning Resource Committee by schools. Ito yung mga components na kailangan nating buuin, especially sa ating schools. The committee about learning resource, which includes the school heads, the learning resource coordinator, quality assurance coordinator, the ICT, of course, the illustrators, and the artists. So after the school learning committee in the district level, there is also a district committee which will help us in the quality assurance and evaluation of the learning materials that we would like to develop. So after the district level, we also have the division learning resource team. So they have welcoming arms and open arms para i-accept and to evaluate our learning resources to make sure na ito ay isang magiging reliable and high quality learning material para sa ating mga learners. So let us now proceed about the considerations in developing learning resources in its general aspect. So what do we need to consider in the general aspect in developing learning resource in print? And the first thing that we're going to tackle about is the priority in developing learning resources. Next is about the instructional design framework of LRMDS and the manuscript definitions and procedures. So the priority in developing learning resources interlinks on the curriculum, instructional design framework, and technical specifications, which are all under the scope of conducted base needs assessment on our learners or beneficiaries. While the instructional design or ID framework with the key concepts from the Republic Act 10533 or Enhanced Basic Education Act of 2013 and the K-12 curriculum directs to the process of instructional design in order to produce learning resources which are aligned to the K-12 curriculum following the ideal provisions. In the development of print or text-based learning resources, we have to clearly define what is a manuscript. So, manuscript defined by the different sources are as follows. From Merriam-Webster Dictionary, it is a written type or type document as distinguished from one that has already been printed or published. Also, it is a document submitted for publication. And from the OxfordLearnersDictionary.com, it is a copy of book, piece of music, etc. before it has been printed. And lastly, from the BLR Textbook Call Guidelines, it is a TX or TN submitted by publishers and authors in camera-ready form for evaluation for textbook call. So here is the certain flow for manuscript preparation for the learning resources. So the first one is the manuscript development. After that, there will be a submission of manuscripts for developmental editing, wherein there will be feedback to the author and where the authors will revise according to those feedbacks and will proceed to the substantive and mechanical editing. Next is that editors will give their queries to the authors and authors will have their responses to those queries before they will proceed to the production planning, the transmittal of final MS to production, the layout and illustration, the proofreading and review of proofs, implementation of corrections or IOC, the finalization of the front and back matter, the final review of prototype, and the transmittal of final files to the printer. After identifying keys in the general aspect, let's move on to the basic preparations we must consider in the preparation in the development of text-based print learning resources. first to consider in the preparation is the document page setup. Next, we will be giving tips for effective book cover, and of course, the typography of K-12 learning resources. So for the document page setup, as we can see from the screen, there are measurements on the margins, paper size, and gutter for the works of the prints like learning materials and teacher's guide. So ito yung fina-follow sa atin sa DepEd kung tayo ay magpo-produce ng print material para sa publication for printing. Next, we also have digital distribution for learning resource portal resources like LRMDS or your digital copy. Iba rin yung kanyang specification sa paper size, margins, and gutter. So, pag titignan, hindi masyado magkalayo, pero there's a big impact, especially kung ang ating gagawin is for printing, for distribution. So, as much as possible, in the preparation pa lang, we should try to follow the page setup required or recommended by the DepEd, like that on screen, para hindi na tayo mag-a-adjust ng masyado kung tayo ay mag-proceed na sa final stage. So here are also the major parts of the learning resources in DepEd. So at sa atin, yung ating mga learning resources like LMs and storybooks developed in our department. So the first one is cover. Next is the front matter or preliminaries, the title page, copyright page, table of contents, and preface. Also, optional is the acknowledgement page or the acknowledgements. So ito yung kadalasan at hinahanap to complete the book, lalo na kung nasa final cover na tayo, back and front cover and the insides. Before proceeding to publication or on a digital man or print, we should ensure that we prepare for the following parts of the learning resources in print. Next one is the tips for effective book cover. So, napakagandang topic ng about sa book cover, but it is very complex. So, it's much better to discuss in a different time or different session. So, for the tips of effective book cover, we should consider that the title should be big and easy to read. So, consistent size and typeface. Hindi pa iba-iba yung font style. And of course, yung font size is consistent at hindi pa alon-alon. So, the next one is do not use cheap clip art on your cover. As much as possible, don't plagiarize and create your own. So, katulad din sinasabi natin, yung book cover is, yun yung pinaka-unang makikita and yun yung pinaka-enterprising part. So, dapat original. So, as much as possible, hindi tayo kokopya and we should illustrate our own. Kung hindi naman natin kaya, is we have also illustrators and layout artists that can help us. So, pwede natin hindi solohin yung ating book because we can get help from other experts. Next is, do not use any of the following fonts like decorative fonts like Comic Sans or Papyrus. So, next is no font explosions and special styling. Huwag natin damihan yung effects sa ating front cover. Lalo na yung cover ng book or book cover since it will reflect almost the book and the impression of the readers or yung mga gustong magbasa. So, hindi maganda pag over-decorated with different fronts and stylings like sobrang daming shadow, outlines ng lettering, and the like. So, we should only keep what is essential para maging readable at very pleasing sa eye ang ating book cover. So, simplicity is always the best. So, next is avoid gradients. So, parang part din siya nung special styling. So, let us avoid gradient colors in the book cover. So, there are other tips or mas marami pang tips about book cover. But, for the preparation, let us consider these tips for effective book covers, especially for the printed, developed materials na gusto nating gawin. So we also have the typography of K-12 learning resources. So as we can see from the table, it is ranging from kinder to grade 12 as well as the teacher's guide. So there is a recommended font family, font size, or body text, line spacing, leading, art-to-text ratio for each level, may it be primary, intermediate, college, high school, or even teacher. So kung mapapansin natin, mas malaki lagi ang font size at allowance ng spacing when we talk about or when we use it in the lower grades, especially from kinder to grade 3. We also use Century Gothic except for the question mark. At also, we use or make sure that it is rugged to the right to avoid hyphenation. So the art-to-text ratio also, there is a larger picture when it is about learning resources for kinder to grade 1 at nagdi-decrease na lahat pagdating hanggang sa grade 12 at as well as a teacher's guide. So it is, mamaya natin matatalakay or we're going to discuss further about the elements or the criterions on following the formats. So ito ay for learners, learning resource preparation. So sa start pa lang, we should try to be cautious about this part para hindi na natin i-revise as a whole. Kung buong spacing ba niya, font style, font size ay sobrang malayo dun sa ideal or recommended typography of K-12 learning resources. So let us now proceed to the considerations in developing learning resources about the appropriateness of materials. About the appropriateness of materials, we have the content, instructional design, language, illustrations, and layout. So, ito yung parts na kailangan natin bigyan ng considerations kung appropriate ba yung nilalaman, yung instructional design, and also the language and illustrations of our learning resource. So, for the power of high quality of instructional materials, there is a growing body of research that points to the positive impact that high-quality instructional materials have on the student learning. So these are the following. They say that high-quality instructional materials allow students to engage more deeply and meaningfully with the standards. Also, high-quality learning materials or instructional materials lead to the additional learning for students. It is also mentioned that high-quality instructional materials have a larger, more cost-effective impact on academic outcomes than many interventions. So, for the appropriateness of materials, considering the content, it should be based on DepEd curriculum standards, also characterized by integrity and accuracy. We should also consider the diversity of cultural, religious, economic, and family backgrounds of our learners or our target audience. Next, we should also develop the concepts that is suitable to the learning abilities of our target users. Develop also not only the cognitive skills but also the social skills and as well as the HATS or the higher cognitive skills. We should also be cognizant of the intellectual property rights. So, ito yung mga kailangang appropriate sa content. So, we should try to follow or incline our work with this, especially the last one about the intellectual property rights. So, for the instructional appropriateness of the materials, content should be from simple to complex, from complete of observable to abstract. Also, it should not only about cognitive skills but also social skills and the higher cognitive skills. We should also provide activities about individual differences or differentiated instruction. So next is we should use systematic approach to solve an instructional problem. There should always also be feedback appropriate to content, learning task, learning response, and learning environment. It should also promote independent study and reflective thinking. So, ito yung sa instructional part, appropriateness of learning resource na gusto nating i-develop. So, we should highlight about the individual differences. And, of course, we should remember to instill the independent study habit of our students with our instructional appropriateness of materials. So, kahit ngayon sa pandemic, napakaganda if ang ating learning materials is i-contextualize natin so that our students can study independently with our guide pa rin kung kailangan. But, instilling the habit of independent study and reflective thinking is very timely since they are studying on their own. From the instructional appropriateness of materials, we have this pyramid with learner, society, and discipline. But above and centering the pyramid is the learner. So we should try to consider the abilities, interests, and needs of our learners since we are in the K-12 and we are in the learner-centered curriculum. But of course, we should be sensitive to the society, customs and traditions and needs that our student belongs to. Next is, of course, being sensitive or considerate with the structure, concepts, and depth and trust and discipline. So now is the appropriateness of materials in consideration with the illustrations, language, and layout. So, for the suitability of language, we should use words that readers can understand according to their level. It should be concrete, simple, direct, precise, and vivid. We should also try to use active rather than passive voice, use vocabulary suitable to the target learners, avoid cliches or dead metaphors, and we should practice using non-discriminatory or inclusive language. Now about the visuals and illustrations. The illustrations or visuals should be relevant to the text. May kinalaman sa text. So, kung ang ating title ng story ay Anna just woke up, dapat dun sa ating image na ipapakita kung sa isa lang o illustration, we should try to show the title or yung essential activity na nangyari sa story. Kasi lalo na kung sa lower grades, para mas makarelate agad sila. So, relevant to the text. Next is facilitate comprehension. So, the illustrations, not only questions, should also facilitate comprehension. It should have accurate representation of the concepts discussed, consistently clear in content and detail. So, sa ating illustrations and visuals, we should not neglect small parts. So, kung tayo mag-drawing or mag-illustrate ng human at kita ang dalawang kamay, kukumpletuhin natin yung mga daliri, yung mga paa, kasi nakikita siya ng bata kahit maliliit. Because very catchy ang illustration. At dahil alam nila ang itsura ng human body, since inaral nila mula kinder hanggang sa anong grade sila, they are very sensitive in the parts of the human body. Kapag may nawalang isang leg, isang paa, kita agad nila at they can start on talking about it and be distracted from their learning. So, sustain interest and do not distract attention of the learner. So, kung ano yung kailangan na illustration, yun yung dapat nating ilagay. Huwag na tayong maglagay ng excessive illustrations na makakapagpalito dun sa ating mga learners. Para yung kanilang focus ay nandun sa illustration na may connection sa ating topic or ang ating lesson. Next is motivating, appealing, and well-organized. So, before we try to publish, of course, learning material, chine-check naman yung illustrations and visuals to make it well-organized. Also, para mas maging successful ang learning outcome, we should try to make it motivating and appealing. Of course, free from objectionable biases or advertising. So, hindi natin pinopromote yung biases dun sa ating learning materials because our target is for our learners to use it para matuto at hindi para mag-promote ng kung anong ideals na hindi na pang students. So, we should try to always check for those things to make it free from objectionable biases. Lalo na kung, syempre, ang students natin and learners ay minors from kinder to grade 12. So, di ba? Next is for appropriate instructional purposes. So, yung mga illustrations should be appropriate for instructional purposes. So, maraming illustrations but hindi lahat pumapasa para sa paggamit sa instructional or illustrations for books. So, for the font style, font size, and layout, it is said that many educationalists believe that materials aimed at young children should use typeface that reflects the letters they learn to write. So, kaya recommended kanina sa ating typography of K-12 learning resources ay yung Century Gothic. Kasi kung paano natin tinuturo yung pagsusulat ng alphabet, ganun din yung itsura ng font style, except yung question mark. So, marami din lumalabas na ngayon na font style na kamukha na ng letters na tinuturo natin in writing para sa mga bata. So, we can choose the best font style so that the writing and the reading activities of the younger learners will be inclined. Next, grades 1 to 3 are set rugged right to avoid hyphenated words and to allow words to be grouped into thought units. So, next, layout helps learner identifying themes and ideas. Of course, layout is very important to make our learning materials very well organized. So next is the considerations in developing learning resource in terms of format. So ito na yung mga technical aspects, but di pa rin ito yung super specific, but it can be your guide in developing for the preparation of your learning resource. So from the considerations in developing learning resources in the format, we have the criterion 1.1 from the factor 2, which states that size of letters is appropriate to the intended user. So from Marinelli 2011, as mentioned, an increase in font size will improve reading rate until the rate of increase reaches a plateau called the critical print size or CPS. The reading speed of learners age 8 to 11 years is less dependent on letter size than that of a 5 to 7 years old. So, katulad ng binanggit from Marinelli 2011, mas bata or from 5 to 7 years old ay mas dependent sa mas malaking font size para sa pagkatuto ng kanilang pagbasa. So, pag nag-age na siya ng 8 to 11, mas hindi na siya dependent dun sa letter size, but still important pa rin to follow the recommended font size for all the grade levels. So the study supports the recommendation that font size in supplementary materials for children in the early grades of school should be bigger. So for the criterion 1.2 of factor 2, spaces between letters and words facilitate reading. So, words and letter spacing or spaces between letters and words facilitate reading. Visual characteristics or typographic cues such as font, font size, spacing, and color are elements that work together synergistically to help a learner understand and use printed information. So, katulad na ating example sa screen, leading refers to the amount of space between the lines of text. It is also known as line spacing. So, as educators, alam natin kung paano mag-adjust ng line spacing sa word. So, para sa mga bata, pag mas mababa ang line spacing ay mas mahirap basahin kasi dikit-dikit masyado, hindi nila ma-visualize kung alin yung group of words or group of letters para maging words. So, to facilitate reading, the spaces should be enough or wider depending on the grade level. So, sa ating mga storybooks for children, mas malaking letter spacing niya pag mas bata. To identify the words isa-isa. Tapos kung dikit-dikit sila, doon pa lang sa isang titig ng bata is mahihirapan na siya magbasa and hindi mapapacilitate yung kanyang skill sa reading. So, next is criterion 1.3 or font is easy to read. So, words and letter spacing, as mentioned before, between letters and words facilitate reading. So, when selecting a typeface for children's text, look for a warm, friendly design with simple and generous letter shapes. The counters, the enclosed shapes within characters, should be rounded and open, not angular or rectangular. The use of bold and italic text, excluding titles, is not recommended for early grade reading material because they are additional typographic cues that must be processed by the learner. Bold text also adds the tonality of the page, so it should be used sparingly. Katulad ng binanggit, the use of bold and italic text is not for early grade, so reading materials, because they are used for typographic cues. And pag nilagay natin sila sa isang page for kids, it will look crowded doon sa isang page na yon kung lahat ng letters ay nakabold. So, it's not necessarily or hindi naman important to use. Let us not make the letters of our fonts or our words or paragraphs bold for our young readers. So, Century Gothic is the most advisable for beginning reading, for it projects the actual image, the letter, except for the question mark. Katulad na nabanggit nung una at hanggang ngayon, most recommended pa rin ang Century Gothic, especially for kinder to grade 3. And pagdating sa grade 4, 5, 6 hanggang sa grade 12, there are also recommended font styles, though hindi na siya katulad nung inaaral ng pagsusulat ng bata because they can already recognize difference on type letter A and also the letter G. So, kaya na nila yun. So, pinapayagan na yung ibang ideal font size at hindi lang basta yung Century Gothic. So, sans serif fonts do not have the little line at the end of each stroke. So, Arial, Calibri, Tahoma, and Verdana are all sans serif fonts. So, sans serif fonts that have a little dash at the end of each stroke. Some examples are Times New Roman, Garamond, Bookman Old Style, and Book Antiqua. So, ito yung mga recommended na font style para dun sa ibang grades, lalo na dun sa intermediate pataas. So, next one is the text readability. So, text readability, we should remember to keep lines length short and don't put too much text on a page. Huwag punuin ang punuin, especially may na sa typography of learning resources na nakita natin sa K-12, there is a ratio sa text, images, or illustrations. So, dense blocks of type can be intimidating to young readers. Pag sobrang daming words ay nawawala na ng gana or kadalasan nga natatakot dahil sobrang dami ng words, lalo na kung ang spacing ay dikit-dikit pa. Avoid all capital settings and which are difficult for the readers of any age. So, huwag tayong gagawa ng paragraph na puro capital letters kung hindi naman siya kailangan Let us use the sentence cases para matuto rin sila sa pagka-capitalize. So in any case, if we have activities for capitalized letters to be used, we should make sure that we have enough line spacing. We should also make sure there is an ample contrast between the type and the background. This is especially true when the setting light type against a dark background, as is common, is heavily illustrated in children's book. So, kung ang ating background ay dark, dapat ang ating letters ay light. At wag na natin lalagyan ng shadow. So, kailangan natin ng harmony dun sa ating mga illustration letters, layout, para maging successful. Kung isa lang element yung susundin natin at hindi natin itatry sundin yung ibang parts, is hindi rin mag-work out yung ating ginagawa para sa ikasasucess ng learning intake ng ating mga students. Though hindi tayo super expert sa mga ganitong bagay, practice lang and we will be able to remember everything at with the guidance of our higher ups and also our learning resource committees in school and district levels. Matututunan din natin ito para sa bata, para mas maging maganda at maging high quality yung ating mga learning materials na ginagawa para sa kanila. So next is the criterion 1.4, still from factor 2. Printing is of good quality, no broken letters, even density, correct alignment, properly placed screen registration. From the screen, we can see a double image. It's a duplication of printed image or text. So katulad niyan, nagkakaroon ng double image kapag sa printing natin ng image or text ay nagpapatong, kaya nagre-reflect as double image. So parang nagiging siyang 3D. So we should check for our materials like that. Hanggat kaya, bigay natin yung best para sa ating mga learners. Kung kaya natin iwasan yung mga ganyang cases. Next is the misregistration, which occurs due to misalignment of impressions or prints, resulting in a color of a figure being printed outside the figure. So, yan din yun. Kadalasan sa machine natin or sa pagsasalang natin. So, hindi sakto yung sa outline ng ating illustration, yung mga colors na dapat nasa loob or even the text. Another one is the print through. So, it is the printed text or image on the front side of the paper that becomes visible on the other side. Pagka baba yung quality ng ating ginagamit na papel, lagpasan yung print sa likod at harap. Minsan naman pag photocopy tayo or tayo ay nagpiprint, scan, napapasama yung anino sa likod, kaya pag tingin natin sa harap is there is also the print through. So we should also try to be aware of this kind of instruction, ating consideration sa learning resource development. Next is the uneven ink density. Is the print that results from pages with different degree in shade. So, hindi pantay yung pasok ng ink sa reproduction natin. Kaya nagkakaroon ng uneven ink density. Though it is a machine-initiated error, we should be aware of it para hindi naman lahat ng ating ipamimigay ay uneven ink density, kasi baka certain parts na kailangan na basahin ay masyadong light, mapuputol na yung learning or yung pag-aaral ng bata ay maaantala because of this kind of issue. So still in the factor 2, illustrations, criterion 2.1. So the first one is simple and easily recognizable. So our illustration should be simple but recognizable. Kahit hindi siya super complex yung detail na detail, basta kailangan kayang i-recognize ng bata. Pakuha natin or ma-attain natin yung goals dun sa ating illustration. So next is the criterion 2.2 for illustrations. Clarify and supplement the text. So it is crucial that designers supplement their reading materials consistently, use illustrations to reinforce meaning of words, not just to increase the entertainment factor or to fill up a page. So, ang ating illustration daw ay hindi lang para mapuno yung isang page. So, kailangan siya ay nagka-clarify or nagsusupplement dun sa text na kailangan nitong suportahan. So, kailangan kung ang meaning ng words ay ganito, makita rin dun sa illustration na ganon. So, kung nakalagay dun ay nasa left ang bola sa illustration, dapat nasa left side ng reference point yung mismong bola para magkasundo or supplemental and adjacent yung text and illustrations. Next is criterion 2.3, still in illustration. It should be properly labeled or captioned if applicable. So, itong ating mga illustrations ay ililabel natin ng maayos kung ito ay figure, charts, table, at kung halimbawa naman ay kumuha tayo or nagborrow tayo ng references with permission doon sa may-ari on web pages or even pictures taken, we should have specific caption para ma-cite sila. Dapat informed din sila para tayo ay wala magka-problema sa copyrights at maging malinaw kung saan nanggaling yung ating illustration or material. Next is criterion 2.4 about the realistic and appropriate colors or the positive characteristics of color. So, positive characteristics of color can motivate readers, especially young readers and those with less reading experience. From Hartley 1994, Marinelli 2011, and Tripol 2010. So, in an early study conducted by Sorrell 1974, it is said that children tend to reject non-colors, and more recent research suggests children prefer the aesthetic qualities of colored reading materials from Horton 1991. So, ito hanggang ngayon is very evident sa mga bata na kukunin nila yung may kulay na material o yung talagang una nilang dadamputin. So, tama naman. Dahil attracted sila sa colors, dahil sila ay bata, napapractice ko na yung kanilang eyesight and very attractive sa kanila yung mga bagong bagay. So, considering the positive characteristics of colors to enhance the motivation of readers, kung kaya nating gawing color o colorize yung ating material na i-develop, much better para mas appealing pa sa ating mga readers at maging interested pa sila lalo na kung ang ating material is about reading and stories. Next is criterion 2.5, still for the illustration, about the attractive and appealing. Katulad ng sinabi kanina sa may kinalaman sa colors, so lahat ng elements pag nagkasundo, magiging attractive and appealing yung ating illustrations hanggat tama yung ating sinusunod. Simple siya, pero maganda, recognizable, and may color, syempre. Attractive and appealing siya sa ating mga students as well as our readers. So criterion 2.6 about illustration talks about culturally relevant. So we should be sensitive and considerate about the culture, traditions, and the environment of our target readers or target users ng ating learning resource. Hanggat kaya, ipasok natin yung mga traditions and themes or ideals ng lugar na yon to make it contextualized and localized. Also, mas may engage sila kung may kinalaman sa kanilang culture or tradition, ilang activities sa kanilang surrounding. So, yan yung dapat nating isaalang-alang sa illustration. Makikita doon kung ano ang itsura ng kanilang ancestors or ng kadalasang pananamit or ng kanilang piyesta kung ilalagay natin. Hanggat kaya, we should try to illustrate it as much as possible that it is relevant or it shows the tradition and culture of such places for our target users. Next is still in the factor 2. The design and layout for criterion 3.1, it should be attractive and pleasing to look at. Katulad ng iba nating criterion, yung layout and design should be attractive and pleasing. Next is criterion 3.2, simple, does not distract the attention of the readers. So, kung ang ating layout ay magulo, nakaka-distract. Kung ating layout ay makalat, nakaka-distract. Kung hindi organized, nakaka-distract. We should try to make our layout simple but organized so that it will not distract the objective of the learners to read. Next is criterion 3.3, adequate illustrations in relation to text. So, meron tayo kanina pinakita rin ng illustration ratio, text ratio. So, kung ano yung kailangang illustration at text, yun ang ating ilalagay as design and layout. So, dapat complementary kung saan nakapwesto ang illustration at ang ating text para maging successful yung design at layout ng ating learning resource na dine-develop. And last, for the design and layout for factor 2, criterion 3.4, there should be harmonious blending of elements, illustration, and text. This is to be considered. So, dapat ay harmonious sila. Yung colors ay nagkakasundo para walang magiging invisible statement or letters or phrase na nagtatago sa color or background ng ating layout at ng ating illustration. So, pag nakumpleto ang elements ng text, illustrations, colors, and layout, doon natin makikita kung or ma-judge kung may harmony ba or blending of elements na maayos para sa pagbabasa or sa paggamit ng learners. Still in factor 2, but all about paper and binding. Kung tayo nasa production na or magpapacheck tayo ng isang draft na nakabind, we should have this criterion 4.1. Paper use contributes to easy reading. So, kapag mas maganda yung ating paper, mas durable, ay mas maganda yung experience sa learning or reading ng ating mga students or ng mga gagamit. So, next is criterion 4.2. Durable binding to withstand frequent use, especially kung bata ang gagamit. Make sure kung final publishing na ito or for distribution na, hanggat kaya is patibayin natin. Dahil pag ang bata ay gumamit, maya't maya yan hanggat hindi magsawa. So, ibig sabihin, dapat hindi magkalas-kalas yung mga pages. So, gandahan na natin yung pagpapabind. Though wala sa natin to control kadalasan, but still we should find the best persons to compile our work. Next is about criterion 5.1, about easy to handle. So, kailangan yung ating reading material is also easy to handle, wag sobrang laki since meron namang recommended or ideal size para sa paper size. But still, it should be easy to handle. Sobrang kapal. So, minsan naman pag sobrang kapal, nahati na sa ilang books o yung inyong gawang learning material para maging easy to handle, para laging mabitbit ng bata para sa kanyang pag-aaral or sa kanyang reading. Next is criterion 5.2, relatively light. So, medyo dapat magaandang since bata ang gagamit, readers natin, kahit grade 12 pa sila, nagde-develop pa rin yung kanilang physical. And kung sobrang bibigat ng books natin or ng ating i-develop na material, tatama rin silang bitbitin or baka magka-problem pa sila sa health. So, hanggat maaari, it is relatively light. So, sa pag-compile na rin po natin yan. So, let us try to have partners for this paper binding para maging mas successful, maging maganda yung finished product ng ating learning resource material. Now is the factor 3. Yan, nasa factor 3 na po tayo. So, presentation and organization. So, para to sa overall na or kung ano mang learning resource, basta print. So, criterion 1, presentation is engaging, interesting, and understandable. So, lahat naman ng kailangan natin gawin as teachers should be engaging and interesting para motivated ang ating learners para sa kanilang pag-aaral. So, next is criterion 2. There is a logical and smooth flow of ideas. So, kailangan natin establish yung logical, systematic way of instructional designing of our ideas para pagdating dun sa ating ginagawa, logical din and smooth yung flow at mas maintindihan ng maayos ng mga bata. Specifically at lalo na dahil tayo ay nasa pandemic, kung may gagawin man tayo, gawin natin logical na para pagdating sa bata, onti na lang yung kanilang tanong or hindi na sila masyadong mahirapan dahil hindi naman lahat ay kayang makipag-communicate kay teacher, lalo na kung deprived sila sa mga gadgets. So next is presentation and organization. Still, criterion 3. Vocabulary level is adapted to the target reader's likely to experience and level of understanding. Yan. Kaakma dapat nung vocabulary level ang target na grade or readers na gagamit ng ating learning materials. Mas simple, mas ibig sabihin, mas lower grade or kinder to grade 3 or primary, at kung medyo tatasan natin yung vocabulary level, there should still be aid or help dun sa loob ng ating learning materials na gagamitin para sa intermediate hanggang grade 12. Next is criterion 4, still in the factor 3. Length of sentence is suited to the comprehension level of the target reader. So, kapag storybook, merong prescribed number of length of sentences, kung ilan yung words sa isang lines, and the like. So, ito ay pwede natin namang matanong or ma-develop ito sa pagpapa-evaluate natin ng ating learning resource material. Just to make sure lagi na hindi lalagpas ng sobra dun sa target reader natin yung ating ginagawa. Kasi hindi rin nagmamaterialize yung ating gawa kung ang ating target is for grade 3, tapos ang ating gawa is parang pang grade 7 na yung learning material grade. Kahit sabihin mo yung topic, di ba? Para hindi magkaayos kasi hindi kaya ng bata yung kanyang hawak na material. Next, sentences and paragraph. Structures are varied and interesting to the target reader. Criterion 5. So, katulad yan, maayos dapat ng sentences, structures, and paragraph para maging interesting sa target reader. So, after those factors, format, we still have also to consider the themes or the social content of our material. So, we should focus on human person, nation, and citizenship, society, race, ethnicity, and culture, religion, role model, gender, population, health and safety, environment, and the others. So, sa ilalim po ng bawat categories na yan ay mayroon pang subcategories na pwede nating pagkuwanan ng magiging social content, lalo na kung contextualized material ang gusto natin. We could get the ideas of our community, our traditions and cultures, at kung ano-ano pa. So, ito po ay guide para sa magiging themes ng kailangan nating gawing learning resource material, lalo na kung ito may kinalaman sa ating subjects or competency based. So, this symbol, the copyright. So, we should be very careful about the copyright of any borrowed material, illustration, text, or statement. So, dapat isa-cite natin sila. So, what is the definition of copyright? Copyright or the right to copy is the legal protection extended to the owner of the rights in an original that he/she has created. So, since gagawa po tayo ng sarili nating learning material na tayo ang author, we should practice to have our original work. Meaning, from the illustration to text, kung kaya, at also from the idea, dapat ay original siya at wala siyang ginagayanan or kailangan is evident na from sarili, or kailangan is evident from your own thinking at drawing yung inyong gawa. So, yan. Napaka-sensitive topic ng copyright. Napakagandang topic din po yan. Next is the copyright infringement. So, ito yung cases kung saan nagkakaroon ng violation sa copyright. References are not complete. Yeah, nakuha tayo but we do not take the complete references. Next is the references are not accurate. Illustrations and drawings are not original. And there is no evidence of permission. So, in times, nakakairaman tayo, we should communicate or email the owner, kung lalo na kung sa web tayo kukuha, to use their work, and they should be properly cited and also in our reference pages. So, photographic images are not reference. So, grounds for copyright infringement din po yan. So, dapat we should recognize the owner of the materials na ating gagamitin para sa ating learning resource material. So, pinaka-safe pa rin if you're going to provide your own, or in short, ikaw talaga yung gagawa ng illustration mo. Kaya, may mga illustrators and layout artists naman sa atin na pwedeng tumulong. We can get ideas, creative ideas from different original works, but we cannot copy the exact idea na meron sila. So, advisable pa rin is to create your own original elements that will be used inside your learning resource material. We also have to take note of this. Use of web content. If it is on the internet, is it free? So, hindi po lahat na nasa internet ay free. Hindi po lahat na walang watermark ay free. Hindi rin po lahat ng free na nakalagay sa search ay free. So, we should take note of this. We should take the reference, contact the owner. Also, find the conditions. Meron kasing license, but they are willing for you to borrow the material, basta well cited. So, there are conditions like that. Especially kung kukontakin nyo po yung owner, ay malalaman nyo if it is okay or not. Lalo na kung ipapublish yung ating learning resource materials sa LRMDS at for distribution in printing, we should make sure that the contents or the illustrations or any elements inside our learning resource materials are with license permissions of the owners para hindi tayo magkaroon ng case sa intellectual property rights at pati na rin sa copyright infringement. So, another issue about use of web content, hindi lahat na nasa web ay accurate, authentic, and may integrity. So, we should still practice data mining. Alamin natin kung ano yung karapat-dapat na information na gamitin at hindi lang basta ang copy-paste at ilalagay dun sa ating learning resource material. Try to rephrase, restructure the idea based on your own understanding. Also, not appropriate material for a government educational publication. From this also is that not appropriate material for a government educational publication. So, hindi pang government publication yung makukuha natin. Minsan, maganda siya pero hindi siya for educational publication. So, we should be careful about that. Kaya di tayo magtanong sa ating mga experts. And also, may not be reliable sources or factual information and contents. So, before ending this, I would like to thank Ma'am Gian Oberines, our Education Program Supervisor for LRN, SDO Quezon, and also our Project Development Officer 2, Sir Joe Angelo Basco, for the contents of this material. So, kung po kinuha, super reliable ng kanilang discussions about this. Also, the references and depth orders and guidelines about the learning resources and also the LRMDS of the Department of Education. Ito po nagtatapos ang ating discussion about learning resource preparation, considerations, and appropriateness on the development process. Sa muli, ako si Anne-Marie R. Alcaraz at sumainyo ang PNU Talk.